Chris. So yeah, the goal with this workshop today is basically just to go through the AgriSuite program. And as we're going through it, we can talk about different issues with manure analysis, interpreting what the available nutrients are going to be. But I think we always find that the first time people go through AgriSuite, as they're trying to find things, it's the hardest. And I'm hoping that by going through the software, it gives you an idea of what it can do and uh, how you can make things a little bit easier. So I'm going to share my screen. And like Chris said, if you've got any questions, please blurt them out because I think it makes it easier if people have questions instead of waiting to the end. So this is the home screen of AgriSuite. And the AgriSuite software is software that's been around for a long time. It started off on a voluntary basis, then it became a regulatory tool, and we finally have it so that it's available for both. So all of these top programs or tools are voluntary. They don't need somebody to sign in or to create an account. They can be used as one-offs or they can be used in more formal planning. The ones at the bottom, those ones are regulatory tools. So that's the nutrient management plan and strategy, the NASM plan, greenhouse nutrient feed water. Those ones we're not even going to talk about today. Basically, we are going to be looking at the crop nutrient tool or crop nutrient calculator, as I like to call it. And it basically, if you've got a soil test and if you've got a crop that you're trying to grow, it gives you an idea of what is the nutrient recommendations based on agronomic recommendations or based on crop removal. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in this next hour. Then we've got the what I like to call the manure calculator. Basically, if you've got a manure analysis, you can plug in the numbers in the manure analysis along with the what is my management for incorporation and for a time of year that you're applying that manure to get a little bit of a better idea or a better estimate of what will be the nutrients that I can expect for my next crop. And usually or often that's corn. So what can I expect for my corn? We have the fertilizer tool. The fertilizer tool basically says if your soil test says you need X, Y, Z for NPK, it can put together the amount of different products to get that analysis, or it can just you can say I want to add some 28%, I want to add some MAP, I want to add some potash in these amounts, and it will put it into the calculator. And then the next one that I'm just going to focus on a bit is the field management plan. The field management plan basically takes the crop nutrient tool, the organic amendment tool, the fertilizer tool, and puts it together into that full rotation. So if I've got a rotation, corn, soybeans, wheat, for example, I can put those crops together, insert where I've got manure and where I've got fertilizer to come up with what is my balance of nutrients at the end of that rotation. That's really where I would like to focus. The manure storage and sizing calculator, it's basically if I have this many animals, how much manure is produced, how much storage capacity do I need based on that manure production plus potential whatever rainwater is coming in. Um, and so that's one we're not going to talk about today, but it is a tool that exists. And then the greenhouse gas calculator is another one that we're not really going to talk about specifically today, but it's a tool that allows you to look at how is the management that I'm doing on my farm affecting greenhouse gas emissions and what practices can I do on my farm in my situation, soil types, that kind of thing. What kind of a difference might it make? It's an estimate. It's basically a tool that shows which portions of the farm are methane emissions versus nitrous oxide emissions and what kind of practices can mitigate those. Like I said, we're not going to talk about them, but there is in the field management, there is a kind of just an icon that says, here's what the greenhouse gas is based on the numbers you've put in. Phosphorus index also shows up, and so does a nitrogen index. So those tools are all kind of put together, and I think we're going to Oh, and then the other thing that I'll just mention, this software is available in French and English. So I can go to here and I can get French or English. It's also available where I can change units on the go. So for example, if I work in, we're gonna be working in Imperial, but if I wanted to work in metric, I could go into metric and then switch metric to Imperial on the go if I wanted to. Where it gets used most of the time is when people work in Imperial, but then the manure application equipment, tankers especially, are in US gallons. So I can do that conversion right at the end. And we might be going through that if I remember. The nice thing about this tool is you can do one-offs. So if I just have a manure analysis and I want to get a pretty, let's say my neighbor has some manure that they want to sell to me, and I want to find out what is the value, what kind of nutrient availability will I get, I can just do a one-off calculation. If I want to do a little bit more, then I'm going to create an account. And the account, basically, it just saves your work so that you can go back and you can go and check out or make adjustments to what you've already done. When you've got an account, you sign in, it saves your work. So I'm going to move to, because I tried to do this from before. So this, I've signed in, I'm in my home screen, and these are just some of the plans that I've worked on before. Um, You can see from here that I really should have given titles to these, because if I really wanted to find out, okay, what did I do on some of these dates? It's I'd have to go through each one of them to figure it out. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is, as we're going through, put as much information as you can so that you can find it again later. We're going to create a new plan. And when I go to create new, I have the whole bunch of options. So I've got my agronomic tools. If I wanted to go to the regulatory tools, or if I wanted to go to the minimum distance separation tools. We are going to the field management tool because, like I said before, it allows me to use those other tools as well. Any questions so far? So Chris had asked in the email if anybody had specific manure tests that they wanted to use. I've got some that we can use if we want to, but if there's somebody that wants theirs, uh, we can use it. All right, well, so this is the home screen, and I start with a field plan. I've got the pencil here that says edit, so I can edit, and I'm going to call this our what do I call it? UTRs. Oops. You're going to find out that when people have webinars, they can't type. Okay. So that way I'll remember what it is. And so then the first thing I'm going to do is give my farm a name. And I will give it, I'll be very original. So UTR Farm 1, and then we go to, this part probably doesn't matter that much, but we can go to owned, rented, or leased. If you're doing a plan that you want to keep and that you want to do some changes to or updates to as the year progresses, then it's probably worth putting as much actual information in as possible. We'll say it's owned, and it is in the county of Middlesex. And we're going to say that it is in Middlesex Center. And then just, I'm making this up. I don't have the plan actually. So I've got that in place. I can put any kind of notes in if I wanted to. Just it's there for reference sake. Then I go to my fields, and I'm going to just be very original and say field 1. There's a bunch of questions The one is a checkbox. Does the field contain surface water? Is there a municipal drain going through, open water or a river? In this case, we're going to say, well, I guess we could say yes, but. And then it gives me a reference for leaving a buffer zone. So that's going to affect how many acres I have for putting manure on. Let's say that farm is 100 acres, just for easy math, and that I have about 98 acres available for manure. Maximum slopes. The most important slope is the slope that's going towards the watercourse. 7 is a bit extreme, but we will put in 5. Just for, again, for purposes of showing some environmental issues potentially. Soil series I'm going to use is, Chris, what's the soil series around Upper Thames? Would it be clay loam or would it be loam?
Yeah, clay loam, clay silty loam. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to just use the one that I'm familiar with, Muriel. And so what this shows you, so when you see hydrologic group C, runoff potential moderate, it gives you an idea of not just the surface texture, but also the subsurface and how that subsurface affects water infiltration. So if I've got a sand, then I've got the potential for nutrients to move through that sand very quickly, potentially getting to the groundwater. Where if I've got a hydrologic group C, generally it's more of a clay soil, it's going to have a lot slower time moving to that layer, that potentially the water table. Silt loam, I think I have the option, no, just silt loam. And then is the field systematically tiled, randomly tiled, or none? I'm going to say most fields are probably systematically tiled. And then where we add systematic tiles, the drainage spacing is often just assumed, but we can change that. So if we wanted to, we could change that to whatever the spacing actually is. And then what percentage of the field is drained? Again, we can change that. Crop heat units, based on the location that we chose in the farm, um, this is automatically set. I can override it. Same with the annual precipitation. It's based on long-term averages at these locations. Next is the soil sample. So it's going to ask for soil sample data. So I'm going to edit that, and we're going to have say that we took that sample last year. So I have the calendar at the side. I can change that to 2025. I'll say that I took that soil sample in late April, and my phosphorus, in this case, I'm going to use 11 because it's not very high. We want some reason to apply nutrients. Potassium, I'm going to use 60 just because, again, that's low. pH. So pH in the crop management tool, if I have a pH problem, a low pH, it's going to give me the buffer information. In the field management plan, that will be added at some point. It isn't yet. So if we need buffer pH information, we need to go to that crop management tool. I'm going to say 6.9, and organic matter, we'll say 3.8. I'm just pulling numbers out of a hat. And if I wanted to, if I had soil test information for potash or not, sorry, for zinc or manganese, I could add that here as well. Or if I have, if I'm getting biosolids and I have to have the trace elements or the heavy metals from that soil sample. So I've got that. One of the questions that came up that I was asked to talk a little bit about was if you've got grid sampling on the field, and how do you handle that grid sampling? And that one is, we don't have it specifically worked in. I think at some point, if we have APIs and some additional tools that other people have that we can utilize. But generally what we say right now is probably if we take that grid sample and we break it into zones, management zones. So what are, first of all, what's the range of soil tests in that field? But is there some that need a lot of fertilizer? Is there some that needs just a little bit? Is there some that needs none? And break it into those kind of management zones. Right now, we can talk about that a little bit more later, but that's how I would handle that kind of information. Next, we've got our field inputs. And so the way that this works, we've got our field one. I guess I'll go back a little bit. If I wanted to, I could, at this point, when I've got my field information in here, I could go and it says more options. I can copy this field. And so if I don't want to input all that same or mostly the same information again, I can copy this field. It says it was successfully copied. So I go back and I can call this field 2. And if there's something different about this field, if the soil test is different, I can add that. If the slope is different, if the soil type is different, I can add that here. I can also change that once I've done all my field inputs. So if I wanted to add the fertilizer and all that kind of information, then I might add it later. And we'll show you the difference. So field input, when I press on that button, I can add a crop, I can add a crop rotation, I can add material application, which is another way of saying manure, and I can add fertilizer. But before I do that, I'm going to add my manure. And so this is basically the manure calculator. I'm gonna use two materials. I'm gonna add a liquid and I'm gonna add a solid. So liquid dairy, and so I go to here to swine, and I've got a whole list of different manure types that we have. And I mentioned in the manure calculator that it's really nice to be able to put in a manure analysis. It also has a database. And so if I wanted to use the database, I can, you can see from that database that we've got over 3,500 samples in that database. We've got the averages for all of the different nutrients. I have the option though of basically taking that manure sample and looking at different dry matter ranges. So 0 to 18, the dry matter is 7.8. If I change that dry matter to just normal manure, it's basically taking it from 2 to 6% dry matter. So it's going to be 4%. I'm going to currently leave it at 0 to 18, but we're also taking an actual lab analysis. The nice thing about this one is that even though I'm looking at just a specific manure analysis, those average numbers are still going to show up. So it's still going to show up if I've got something that's way out of whack, so to speak. We're also going to add some other nutrients. So I can add or remove nutrients. So I've got the potential to add all the regulated metals. I don't have to go through and pick each one and check them. Boron, calcium, carbon to nitrogen ratio, magnesium, manganese, sodium, sulfur, organic matter, pH, and total salts. Most of you will probably not have these all on your analysis, but we're going to go through them and basically say, okay, this is why it's valuable or important. So for the liquid, for the liquid dairy, the manure analysis that I have, this is an actual manure analysis, 6.7% dry matter. Total nitrogen is, so if I have my total nitrogen and my ammonium nitrogen, which in this case is So I can find out what my organic nitrogen is from having these two. My phosphorus is 0. Like you'll see with dairy manure compared to pig manure or even beef manure, the phosphorus levels in that manure are generally pretty low. Relatively speaking, dairy manure does not have that much phosphorus. So this takes a little bit of time, but you'll notice that, well, I'll go back. So if I look at my database, I've put in 1841. The database would say the average from those 3,000 samples is 1418 parts per million. And the other thing that I'll just mention is lots of times people ask, well, maybe I'll talk about that when we get to calcium. Zinc in this case is 23. Boron is 2 parts per million. So calcium on the manure analysis, the calcium came up as 4.07%. But in AgriSuite, because we have the greenhouse feed water and those nutrients are so small, they had to put everything into parts per million. So to go from parts per million or from percent to parts per million, you multiply by 10,000. So basically 4.07 becomes 4,007. In this case, 1. So 4.07 suddenly becomes 40,721 parts per million. So, oh, that's for my poultry one. That's actually too high. 2268. So for poultry manure, the calcium is very, very high. Dairy manure, not quite so much. Carbon to nitrogen ratio of this manure is 10 to 1. The C to N ratio of soil is also 10 to 1, just FYI. And magnesium. So this takes a little bit of time. I usually like to have this done ahead of time, but for the purposes of going through this. Sodium is another one that's often in percentage. So 0.13% is 1,300 parts per million. Sulfur is one that we're suggesting people test for, just because fertilizer companies are saying, oh, you need sulfur for your crops. And so we might as well take advantage of what the manure is providing. Having said that, that sulfur is an elemental form, which is a slow released form. Organic matter in this case is 5.1, which doesn't seem very high, but because it's liquid manure at 6.7% dry matter, you wouldn't expect it on an as-is basis to be very high. And total salts, the reason that we even test for total salts is because if I apply that manure and I plant into it the same day, if I have a high salt number, it could give me some salt injury or some nitrogen damage. So this total salts. I must have forgot to write it down. We'll use the average in this case because I can't remember what it was. Oh, it was 15. So there I have my manure analysis. If I have an account and I want the report, that report is going to give me all this information so that I have it saved. Also makes it pretty easy to edit it if I get a manure analysis and there's some adjustments to make. Sometimes what people will do, we always suggest that the best time to take a manure analysis is when that manure is going onto the field. So sometimes people will use the database numbers and then we'll fine tune those numbers when they get their analysis back. We're also going to add a poultry manure. Um, so in this case, it's solid and it's a compost. It's mature compost. Compost. And it's a lab analysis. I'm not going to put as many numbers in, but 69% dry matter. So see that with solid manure, the numbers are quite a bit higher, especially when the dry matter is around 70%. And we will add just a couple. We'll add zinc, calcium, C to N ratio. And pH. So the calcium in this case was 407. C to N ratio. Usually the C to N ratio of solid manure is higher, but this is a compost that's already been worked down, and it's because it's poultry, that carbon to nitrogen ratio is 8:1. Magnesium 7,139. And pH in this case is 8.5. The pH of solid manure is most of the time quite a bit higher than liquid manure. Okay. So we could add more, but that's good enough. Oops. So now I want to go back to my field. And because what we're trying to do in this case is, and I'm good if somebody has a specific rotation that they'd like to suggest, otherwise I'm just going to put in a crop rotation of corn, soybeans, and wheat, just because it's easy and it's relatively fast. And I have the option, I can do grain corn, or I can do silage corn or sweet corn. Soybeans, basically just soybeans. With the wheat, I have winter wheat that I can have the straw removed, or winter wheat where I put the wheat back. I think for this case, we will just use straw removed, although adding it back is good for maintaining organic matter. So the rotation's been added. And so now the next thing I need to do is I need to put down the yield. So I have a yield goal. We're going to be optimistic, 200 bushels per acre. Depending on if I had a red clover cover crop, I might have a nitrogen credit. We're going to say mulch till, up and down slope. And then if I want to, I can say that the manure anasm supplies the nitrogen for this crop. We're not going to do that in this case. If we wanted to get more fine-tuned, we could. So basically, I've added this crop. It tells me, so we've got agronomic crop removal hybrid. In this case, I've done hybrid, but these crop production recommendations would be the agronomic recommendations based on my soil test numbers. So my soil test was relatively low. It was 11 for phosphorus, 60 for potash. So it's going to say that I need quite a bit of phosphorus and potash. My nutrient removal in this case is 8458. So basically, my phosphorus removal is higher than the recommendations. For potash, my recommendations are higher than the removal. So I'll be looking at the hybrid, but we'll also look at what the removal tells us for recommended rates. My next one is the soybeans. So soybeans, we're going to say no-till and going to be optimistic for a 60 bushel yield, assuming it's not too dry in August. And then we've also got the dates that we can adjust if we need to. Again, here, because I've got hybrid, my production recommendations say I don't need any because nitrogen is produced from the legumes on the soybeans, or from the nodules, I mean. Phosphate, potash recommendations, there's the removal. It also gives me, based on my site characteristics, an estimate of soil erosion based on the no-till and the crop itself. Where's this one? And then the wheat, I'm going to again say no-till and optimistic yield. We're never going to be pessimistic on our yields. So,
Chris,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. I always get comments from growers about those yield, like those geo township averages being low. Is that like a 15-year average, or do you know?
it's probably between a 5 and 10 year average, depending on how often we update it. But it takes everything into consideration. So, like, it's crop insurance, we get it from AgriCorp. Um, so people that are managing their crop better are going to have higher yields. This includes everything.
So that you're use the yield goal for your farm based on your history.
Yeah. Yeah. This is if you don't know where to start, or it's you just want to use averages. But if I was an 82 bushels per acre wheat average on a year, if it's dry, or on a year where you have a fair bit of winter kill, yeah, that might be the average. But if I've got the conditions where the weather cooperates, the winter cooperated, then I'm probably going to be I might be better to say 95 bushels if I was being realistic. But if I was using my farm as an example, I would 95 would be more realistic. 100 is my goal.
Okay. Thank you.
And if it's a regulatory plan, then you have to be far more careful with this. Okay. Again, it's telling me that my crop recommendations wouldn't be adding a lot of nutrients, but if I look at my overall removal, it's going to be quite a bit higher, especially because I'm removing the straw. If we went, and this is where you can try things. This is where it's kind of neat. So if I just have winter wheat where I'm putting the straw back, I have that same, every time you change something, you have to put the yield back in, unfortunately. But so see, instead of 110, I'm only removing 36. So that makes a big difference in my removal numbers. Oh, 164, it wasn't even 110. Okay. And my estimated soil erosion, again, based on site conditions. So if I wanted to, I could copy this field now. And I could call it field 3. And so, oops, not field 33. And so then if I needed to, I wouldn't have to put that crop rotation back in. So if I've got a lot of fields that are similar in crop rotation, in yields, in soil type, whatever, then that copy tool it means you don't have to input everything all over again. Go back to field 1. Okay, so now what I've got is I've got my corn, my soybeans, my wheat, and what that shows you basically now is just the nitrogen recommendations and the crop removal for those 3 crops. And so at the end of those 3 years, I'm basically looking at about 300 pounds of nitrogen that I need to supply. I'm removing about 200 pounds of phosphorus, and I'm removing over 300 pounds of potash because this number was higher in the crop removal. Now, if I went to agronomic, that balance would be quite a bit different. And if I go to crop removal, again, and the reason I don't like crop removal totally is because it says that the soybeans are removing 233 pounds of nitrogen, and that's actually not the case. They're really not removing any. So the hybrid takes that recommendations versus the removal into account. So that's the one I like best. Now, when it comes to the report, it's going to show both the agronomic and the crop removal. We'll get to that later. So that gives me an idea of okay, this is what I'm removing. If I have low fertility levels, then I really want to make sure that I'm adding enough nutrients to cover what's being removed. If I had really high soil fertility levels, I have a field beside a manure storage that has somewhere between 30 and 60 parts per million of potash, or sorry, phosphorus, and over 200 parts per million of potash, then yeah, I might just be looking at starter fertilizer and trying to draw down those numbers. Because once I'm over 30 to 35 parts per million, that risk for phosphorus into the watercourses becomes a lot higher. At the same time, if I've got 11, that's pretty low. I definitely need some nutrients. So back to the add crop inputs. I'm going to start with manure. And the question here becomes, where in this rotation can I add the manure? If I've got a corn, soybean, wheat rotation, obviously after wheat harvest is going to be my best opportunity. So I'm going to add, what do people want? Do they want me to start with liquid or with solid? Or maybe a bit of both? It's a quiet bunch. Okay, I'll start with liquid. So I'm going to add liquid manure. I'm going to add it after the wheat harvest. This, to me, this is the hardest part of the that field crop management tool, is getting it accurate where I applied the different materials. So if I went back, I'm adding corn May the year of 26. So my material application, I put it on after wheat harvest last fall, so it automatically takes me to 2025. And I applied it by tanker, and I incorporate it. Depends on how I did this. I'm going to assume it was a cover crop, so I incorporate it within 2 days. Um, and my application rate, because I'm putting out manure. This is another nice thing about maybe that's a little bit too high. We'll say 6,500 gallons. Um, this is the nice thing about the manure calculator. So I've just said that this is my management. I'm putting it on in early fall. Um, and it gives me the information that I'm estimating that I'm going to get about 7.5 pounds per 1,000 gallons of nitrogen for this year's corn crop, and about 11 pounds of phosphorus per 1,000 gallons, and about 26, 27 pounds of potash. So if I'm applying at 6,500 gallons, I'm going to get about 50 pounds of nitrogen credit, 74 for phosphorus, 175 basically for potash. Trace elements, if I press that information button, 150 pounds of calcium, 63 pounds of magnesium, 1.5 pounds of manganese, 85 pounds of salt, 21 pounds of sulfur, half pound and a half of zinc, a little bit of boron. So it just gives me an idea of what am I adding to the soil. It might not be available because we don't have that information for the trace elements, and it depends so much on pH, but it gives us at least an idea of what's being added. So if somebody said to me, oh, you have to add sulfur, well, for my corn crop, I probably don't need sulfur because I'm adding it. Even though it's an elemental form, slow release, the only time that I would think about adding some commercial sulfur would be if this was being added in the spring to a wheat crop. That wheat crop just can't get the nutrients that quickly if it's in elemental form. So I might need a little bit of sulfur for that wheat crop in the spring. But Anybody have questions about this? There's a lot of information here. Then the other thing that it shows is my estimated economic value based on 6,500 gallons. Um, Now, 6,500 gallons, I might actually be able to add a little bit more than that because my phosphorus and potash levels are relatively low. So let's say I was going to add 8,000. Do I get any red flags? So the red flag says that that's past the in the over a 24-hour period. So it depends on what the weather conditions are. It's basically just saying if you're applying that rate, make sure you're not going to get runoff. Make sure that if possible, it's infiltrating and incorporated as quickly as possible. What is that rate? So anything over 6,500 basically. We're going to live with that red flag for the time being.
So Chris,
Yep.
when you're picking the timing of the manure application or some of those other details like incorporation or cover crop exists, that is changing the amount of nitrogen available to the crop. There's
Yeah. So this is where in this tool, it's really nice to do some exploration. So if I was going to, well, let's keep it at 2 days because that's really not. If I was going to apply that in the spring, take a look at how that the potash numbers aren't going to change, the phosphorus numbers aren't going to change, the nitrogen is going to change quite a bit. So spring, oops, where did it go? Oh, there it is. Um, so in the spring, suddenly I'm going from 60, what was it before? 60 pounds or 70? No, it was about 50, 49. I go from 49 pounds to 89 pounds. Um, so this is a manure. This manure it's typical dairy. When I look at dairy manure, generally, if I look at total nitrogen, half of it is in ammonium when it comes to dairy. Where if it was pig manure, you'd have probably closer to 3/4 in ammonium form. It's the ammonium portion that's available most quickly. So that's where your quickly available nitrogen is coming from. But we went from spring to early fall, from basically from 7.5 to 11. If we were injecting it and we were going to spring, we go from 11 in the spring to 18. So we're losing a lot less. So this is estimated. It really comes down to what are the conditions in the spring? If it's a cold backward spring, I'm going to expect less of this than if it was a nice, relatively warm spring, because some of this comes down to microbial activity. The other thing that I look at when I look at this number and is that we'll go to 1 day incorporation. So the other thing I look at here is what are the conditions when I apply that manure? If the pH is high and the conditions are warm, then I have the potential to lose a good portion of this nitrogen more quickly through volatilization. If the pH is closer to 7 or lower, then that loss is going to be somewhat lower than if the pH is high. The other thing I look at is when will this be available? If my corn crop really needs the nutrients between six leaf stage and tasseling, then how much of this is going to be available? And so the carbon to nitrogen ratio of this manure was 10:1. It's the same as the soil. So I would expect if the microorganisms in the soil are relatively active, then that nitrogen, that organic portion is also going to become available fairly quickly. If that carbon to nitrogen ratio was 14:1, 15:1, then I'm going to say, yeah, that nitrogen is going to become available, but probably not fast enough during that elongation phase. It's probably contributing more to that late stage nitrogen needs that works to help with protein and with test weight to some extent. So that's looking at that analysis and saying, yeah, those are some of the things that analysis is telling me that if I didn't have carbon to nitrogen ratio and pH, I'd be guessing a little bit more. So let's go with a rate of 7,500 gallons and let's use spring. No, let's not. Let's use fall still. Early fall cover crop exists. Notice what happens when I have a cover crop. If I have a cover crop, we suddenly have a little bit higher nitrogen. And that's just because if I've got a cover crop, that cover crop is taking in those nutrients, that's being stored in the biomass, so it's not being volatilized or moved below the root zone. Are these numbers 100% accurate? It's the best we've got until we get more research data. All this information comes from research. It's approved by Ontario Soil Management Committee, where all the recommendations go through. Once we get updated numbers, we can update these as well. Any questions so far on, oh, and then economics. I wanted to talk about the economics a bit. So the economics, it basically uses a 2 cent per gallon cost for application. And then the nitrogen, the usable nitrogen is given at 85 cent per pound equivalent. Basically, this is the NPK from fertilizer if I was purchasing it. So for phosphorus, a $1.10 per pound, potash, 56 cents per pound of actual phosphorus potash. So this gives us an idea of the value. So after the application cost, it's basically worth about $115 per acre NPK equivalent. That doesn't account for the organic matter. It doesn't account for the micronutrients. So if I'm buying manure from my neighbor and I want to pay NPK equivalent, I'm getting the organic matter and the micronutrients gratis. Also get a p-index value here. So for example, I'm just going to show you. So green means good. We don't have to go into the phosphorus index per se. But if I change that to late fall and it was surface applied, well, late fall, I'm going to change that to today. And it's surface applied. Well, let's say it's onto crop residue. It's still green, but it shouldn't be. So it tells me my contribution from surface runoff is 350. My contribution through tile is 185. So basically pretty high risk. But if the phosphorus index is green, I'm kind of surprised it's green. I don't know where it turns yellow. But it does give you an indication, and it's the same with the nitrogen index. So obviously we're not going to do enter.
Chris,
Yep.
there is a question in the chat. It's how often are the dollar values for fertilizer updated? In a year of high costs, is it worth adjusting these numbers ourselves?
Yeah, well, it is worth adjusting the number yourself because these were updated in December. We try and update the fertilizer numbers every time that we release a new version of or like we update the software for whatever reason. But we do allow for defaults here. So economics. So if, for example, some people are going to say let's say it's solid manure, they might not, and it's after wheat harvest, they might not want to pay for the nitrogen because they don't know how much of it's going to be available. So you can override the cost to actual numbers. Same with the phosphorus, same with the potash. So these are relatively accurate right now. Some people might get better values because they get discounts or like this nitrogen is based on urea. This is based on super triple phosphate. And it would be similar, MAP would be a little bit higher because you've got the nitrogen component in there as well. And then the potash, that number goes up and down. It hasn't changed that much of late. But yes, you can definitely override those costs to be your own. This is just a fast way of looking at it. The other comment that I want to make is this estimated value is only true if you utilize those nutrients. If I'm putting this manure on a field that has phosphorus levels of near 60 and potash levels over 200, then really this is only going to the fertilizer bank and I'm really not going to get the economic value of those nutrients. I'm going to get that economic value if I apply those nutrients to a field that actually needs those nutrients. So that's a caveat with the economic value. Are there any other questions in the chat? But
No,
notice how much lower the phosphorus index is when I have no-till incorporated with one in one day.
but thank you for the answer.
No worries. I was expecting more people to have more questions. Okay, so close this. Um, so far, oh, I'm going to go back one more time. And because I told you at the beginning that if we can put as much information as possible, it makes it much easier to read when you go back. Dairy liquid. Even though it says dairy liquid, when I go to, what was this? So now you can see I've added the dairy liquid. This, oh, oops. I forgot to change the date back. Late fall. Late fall. Okay. Hopefully that's, yeah. So applied in November. Corn is planted in May. Now, if I look at the nutrient balance at the end of these 3 years, I've only just started. Obviously, that's not going to give me all the nutrients that I need. So soybeans, I'm basically going to leave soybeans where we don't add any nitrogen. But if I wanted to add some more manure, I might add it again after this. I can add it after corn, although it's pretty late in the season. I can add it after soybean harvest ahead of winter wheat, or I can add it after the winter wheat. Um, let's just say that we're going to apply it. Maybe we can change that corn to silage corn because it's going to come off faster. Just see what this does. This is showing where you can, I'm going to say play, but where you can try different scenarios. 22, we're going to say 25 tons because that's quite typical. And now that's going to mean there's a lot more removal. So that changes those numbers quite a bit. But after corn silage, if I wanted to add material, and let's say in this case, just to show you the difference, we're going to add our poultry compost. And the poultry compost costs a little bit more, but this is going to be somewhat similar to poultry manure, only a little bit safer. Again, it's going to be early fall this time after harvest. And let's apply a rate of, now you probably wouldn't afford this, but let's say 4 tons. Now, if I wanted to use a poultry manure, like actual chicken manure, it would be quite a bit higher in nitrogen. Because of the composting process, most of it is in organic form. And so that organic form is slow release. So there's not going to be as much. But it's going to give me a fair bit of phosphorus and potash. And soybeans don't need the nitrogen, so that's probably a good place for it. Okay. So here it shows you that at a rate of 4 tons, I'm adding some additional nitrogen, or a little bit of nitrogen, but phosphorus and potash. We don't have a cover crop. It's crop residue, but we're incorporating it. So this is just scenarios, and hopefully I've got one that's close to your scenario, but Might not be. So I'm still not adding enough for that corn crop. Oh, so this is where dates become important. And this is also where it looks like I'm adding it the fall before. I actually wanted to add it the later fall. Um, so I can go to plus and it increases it to the cropping year. So hopefully that worked. That was a change that was just made. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Okay. Yeah, okay. So now I've got the dairy manure was applied after the wheat harvest, but the nutrients are going towards that corn silage. The poultry compost is added after silage harvest, but the nutrients are going towards that soybean crop. I still don't have enough nutrients for the corn crop, so now I can add fertilizer. And so there's two different ways I can do it. I can add it as typical what I would do. So for example, I can say this is my starter and it's going to be incorporated with the planter. So it's basically going to be a 2x2 blend. And it gives me the option of putting in the blend. So I can say I'm going to apply, oops, I didn't want to do that. Um, dry. So I've got a whole bunch of basically every type of fertilizer that you can imagine. Um, I can go with MAP at, oops, at 200 pounds. And so that's what it's giving me. And then I'm going to add a little bit of potash. Again, go down. Now, when I do this, I have to be careful that I'm not causing a salt injury, but I'm doing this just to give an example. So basically, with that product, I'm adding a little bit of starter, and it shows up as starter. I'm still going to be a little bit low on my nitrogen. So I'm basically applying 70, 90 pounds. So I want to add fertilizer. And in this case, I'm going to and there's different ways you can do this, but I can, in this case, I'm going to have a liquid and 28% knifed in. And if I have a goal of, I don't know, somewhere around, this is where you do the trial and error, or if you've got a specific amount. But 30 gallons per acre would give me about 100 pounds. So what I can do is I can look at that nutrient balance for the 3 years. And so my nutrient balance for the first year says that I'm a little bit over on nitrogen, I'm a little bit over on phosphorus, a little bit over on potash. But when I look at the multi-year balance, I'm still low. I think I'm still low. Gives me the nitrogen index, the phosphorus index. So now I'm at 171 for the phosphorus, still green. Nitrogen. So if I was trying to put on too much nitrogen and there was going to be significant nitrogen left over that fall to spring period, and especially if I had a sandy soil, I would tend to have yellow or red for nitrogen index or a higher number. But if I'm targeting that nitrogen to be what the crop needs and not applying too much that's going to be there over that winter period, exposed to runoff or leaching, then my numbers are going to be relatively good. So if I look at the nutrient balance, I'm adding 108. I'm not good at doing math in my head, but 130 basically. So I'm close to 200. My nitrogen recommendations for the silage was 164. So it's a little bit high. I probably could get away with a little bit less. Some people are they want to have a specific amount of nitrogen. I think I'm going to lower that just a little bit. Um, and in this case, the other thing I was going to suggest was instead of calling it fertilizer app, side dress. Again, that just it makes it easier when, oh, oops, I was going to change that. So I was going to change it from 30 to, let's say 25. So that's a little bit closer to my targets. Still a little bit higher than I need, but then nitrogen here, it's going to show that I have more nitrogen than I need because the soybeans don't need any. Just because you put nitrogen on a crop that has legumes doesn't mean that the legumes don't use it. It just means they don't use it as efficiency. They're going to use the nitrogen from the fertilizer or from the nitrogen that's in the soil before they start producing their own. When they run out, that nodulation will generally start again. And then if I look at the nutrient balance over those 3 years, I'm adding some phosphorus. I'm still low on potash, and I obviously need some nitrogen for my wheat. So again, what I would do is add field input, add fertilizer. I want to add it for so the wheat is 2027, 28. I want to add that for 2027 and September. When you're planning, you can make up app numbers. Most of the time, people will apply some starter with their wheat just because the phosphorus just helps with it. It's been well proven that phosphorus helps with yield. So starter, I'm going to put on some MAP, and because I need to be careful with dry MAP. Application rate of 50 pounds. And that's okay. So then, oops. So even when you use this a lot, you still get it wrong sometimes. And if it's going to be somewhere I get it wrong, it's going to be with the wheat. Oh, so with that starter, if I had changed that to October the 1st, now it shows up with the wheat. So it just depends on what planting date you've chosen. So then I'm going to add one more input, fertilizer. So that fertilizer application is here. Oops. I want to, it's my N spring N. In this case, we're going to say that it's broadcast into a standing crop because the wheat's there. And I'm going to apply urea. Um, Probably somewhere around 200 pounds. But I also want to add some potash because if I'm going to broadcast the nitrogen, then I have the opportunity to also add potash. And we saw that the potash was still a little bit low. And so here we can do that blend and save an application across the field. There's different times and placements that people can do this. I'm just using this as an example. Um, so we're trying to build our phosphorus a little bit. So we're putting it on at 200 pounds. Those. So then it gives me, okay, I'm at about, so depending on how much nitrogen, Peter Johnson will sometimes recommend 120. Some people will recommend 100. It depends on what you're doing. We're going to go as close to balance as we can because the other thing that we have is nitrogen credits from the manure that's been applied in the past couple of years. How much of that is going towards that wheat crop depends a little bit on weather conditions, but we've got good nitrogen in that soil. So if I look at the balance over the 3 years based on what we've done, we've got nitrogen at a little bit more than what's required for the recommendations. We're adding enough phosphorus that we're going to build our soil test a little bit. Potash, we're still pretty low. If we added more potash, that wouldn't be a bad thing. So basically, it takes about 35 pounds of P2O5 to increase or decrease the soil test by 1 part per million in phosphorus. So if I'm looking at 149 divided by 35, I'm basically adding about 4 parts per million. Are we going to see that in the soil test right away? Probably not. It depends on pH, time of year, that kind of thing. But we are adding more phosphorus than what's being removed. For potash, it takes about 20 pounds of K2O to increase the soil test by 1 part per million. So basically here we're adding around 2 parts per million. So not really building that soil test a lot, but at least we're not decreasing it either. So when I look at this kind of a nutrient balance, I'm looking at where do I have opportunities to add manure, add different sources of manure, what sources are going to, so if I've got a opportunity to get some biosolid pellets, or I've got an opportunity to get some ashed biosolids, or some poultry compost or dairy compost or manure from my neighbor, it lets me at least say, okay, what's going to be the best economics for the field situation that I'm trying to address? How does the fertilizer I'm adding and the nutrients and potentially the cover crops, how does that impact my overall nutrient balance? Because over the long term, I want my soil test or my fertility soil test basically to be around that 20 to 25 parts per million for phosphorus. Gives me some wiggle room. If fertilizer prices are high and I've got parts per million of 20 for phosphorus, I don't need quite as much if those values are high and the crop prices are low. But if I'm at a low level, then I have no choice but to at least utilize some fertilizer because I can't grow a good crop without fertilizer. If I'm high, again, that gives me some opportunities to save on commercial fertilizer and really maybe just look at starter fertilizer. So that goes through. Okay, then we'll just look at the report. So the report, I can look at the different things that I've used, and I can look at the detailed view, which gives me all the information. So it includes the information for the crops, material applications, fertilizer applications. It's a lot of data. I can do it for all three farms, or I can just do it for the current farm, which is what we're going to do, current farm, and I can generate that report. It takes a second. So I guess this is the report. So I've got my material types. So that gives me the information that I input for my manure analysis. This is same for the poultry compost. It gives me the field information, what was the soil type, what was the slope, all that kind of stuff, which is handy to know if you just pick things out of a hat and you want to you want to update the information. Um, and then it gives me the manure I used. So here it's gone from agronomic and crop removal. So it gives me that information for both, where on the screenshots we used the hybrid. And so the hybrid was basically taking the agronomic for nitrogen and the crop removal for phosphorus and potash. So it gives me my nutrient balance for each year, for the soybeans, for the wheat, and then it gives me my multi-year balance. When I look at some of the flags, so this is going to tell me that I used more than what the crop needs for the one crop in that cropping year. But if I'm looking at multi-year balances and I'm looking at trying to build soil test, and if I'm looking at trying to apply the fertilizer, apply the manure using 4R principles, then incorporating it as quickly as possible, utilizing those materials in crop is going to be beneficial from an environmental perspective. So some of these flags, they're there to give you the information. They may not apply. This one, it tells me that I've exceeded the amount for a cropping year. If I applied more than 200 pounds of nitrogen, it would tell me that I've applied more than what the crop needs. And that's an environmental caution. So there you want to know that the crop is actually going to utilize 200 pounds of nitrogen or more. And that often happens when I'm applying let's say a manure that doesn't get incorporated, or there's a fair bit of that ammonia that's allowed to be lost. Then even though there's more than 200 pounds of nitrogen being applied, it might not all be there for the crop. So it gives those environmental indicators. Here for the nutrient balance, it's going to tell me that I've exceeded it because the soybeans doesn't need any. I'm surprised that usually there's a flag that says there's this much coming from the manure, but I don't see that. So maybe there isn't that much year 2, year 3. Then it gives me the information that I included for the application of the dairy manure, corn silage, the fertilizer I applied. So it basically goes through all the different things we did in that program. It's there mostly if you want to come back and be able to adjust it. If I wanted to, I can print this report. I could share this with, let's say I have a consultant and I want to share it with the consultant. I can either save it as a PDF or I can print it. If I wanted to, I could. So if I went home, I think I could do this. We're going to try it. I should have tried this ahead of time. I can go to my home screen again and I could export this and share it with a nutrient management consultant, or if it's Upper Thames that needs it. And this would send it as a JSON file, which is basically somebody can take that file and then put it into the AgriSuite. I would probably, if I was sending this for verification, would send it as a PDF. Um, so that goes through some of just the going through the AgriSuite. Maybe I don't know how much time we have left. We have a little bit left. We can maybe just open it up and just, if people have questions, if there's some other scenarios you want me to look at, we can maybe open it up. I can stop sharing
Okay.
if that's easier.
There's another question that popped up in the chat. So it's do you have any suggestions for how we might take into account the use of ureas and or like nitrification inhibitors when adjusting our nitrogen rates?
That's a really good question. Um, so in the fertilizer, let's go back to uh, let's go back to this. So if I wanted to, oh, oops, what was the side dress? Oh, see, I got the wrong date on here. The calendar is the part that gets me into the most trouble. Doing a webinar is, is the one that somebody's going to catch me on. But no, so what if I wanted to, I could change this, and one of the options is the pure yield. So I don't know if this answers the question, but that pure yield, if my application rate was, no, it was 200 pounds, then 200 pounds is going to give me, yeah, okay. So that's going to already adjust that availability. I don't know if it's going to show it, but that availability from the fertilizer, because the manure nitrogen, we're not using a nitrification inhibitor in that manure, at least not yet. We don't have the John Lozon's done some research on nitrogen inhibitors in manure, but they haven't. If we use it in the spring with manure, the question becomes how quickly is it going to break down? When is that nitrogen going to become available? How much of it is going to become available? So until we get the research on that, I'm not sure I would recommend nitrogen inhibitors in manure unless it's a side-by-side comparison type of thing. And then please share the data with me. Um, but the where you're using manure in the spring and you use a nitrogen inhibitor with the commercial nitrogen that gets applied maybe all up front, then yeah. But the other strategy that I think makes more sense is if you have an idea of what the available nitrogen from your spring application will be, then doing some based on weather and maybe some side dress, pre-side dress nitrogen tests, get an idea of how much of that nitrogen are we in a cold backward spring? Can we expect, so in this case, um, can we expect to get that 70 pounds from the nitrogen? Um, or do we need to add some with side dress? And with the side dress, we can be a little bit more accurate with what our needs are going to be. Um, what was the other? I was going to say something else. No, it's gone. Yeah, lost my train of thought. Are there any
Uh,
other questions in the chat?
yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. I had a few. I figured I'd wait till the end, just let you power through all of it. So we started using soil mapping as our soil test.
Right.
So how would you recommend using that as your soil inputs? Would you take the median or the average of the field, the highs, the
I guess it
lows?
depends. It depends on how big the range is in nutrients. What I would try and do is can you put them into management zones? And depending on the shape and everything else, it's much easier said than done. But is there an opportunity to put them into those three management zones and then potentially those three management zones become three different rates of manure or
Yeah.
of fertilizer nitrogen or fertilizer period? That's how I would start. There are there are technologies like the Harvest 3000, and then there's other ones that are going to be coming on the market where you can fine tune the amount of the amount of manure that's applied. I'm not sure we're quite there yet for most farms, and
Does it?
even where you've got the Harvest 3000, it still needs to be calibrated to what the manure nitrogen is. So I don't know if
Okay.
that answers your question, Brett.
Well, can you zone your fields in this app? Like you could do
Not
four, do three, or no? No?
not yet. We're trying to get that through APIs, which that's a computer term that I don't exactly understand, but that's next places that this software is going, is to try and be able to incorporate other people's apps and just use this information in that app.
Yep. Okay.
So
Uh,
so that's the best we can do right now.
okay. Have you guys thought about adding weather to it as far as like if you can add in precipitation, it can kind of tell you how much you've lost, how much is still there kind of thing? Like different, because that's one variability that's a big one, and it's kind of hard to tell without, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, no, and the simple answer to that is no, we're not. But what we are trying to do, and if anybody is interested in participating, um, we're trying to get a better idea. So the AgriSuite software a, it does a good job of estimating what is the potential nitrogen that's going to be available. But there's a lot of other things that come into it. So for example, um, what is my organic matter level in my soil? My soil test, my soil organic matter, because that's going to impact nutrient cycling. And what is my history of manure application? Because the more times I've applied manure, that higher nitrogen rate is still going to be in that soil. What are the soil parameters? Like what is my soil texture? What is the drainage? Because all those things are part of the field history that we can't ask in AgriSuite, but makes a big difference in, well, not a big difference, but makes a difference in how much nitrogen we can expect. And so what we're hoping to do, and it's based on some testing that Cornell University is doing, and we want to cooperate with them, except on more than just dairy. So we have three strips of manure in the field, three field length strips, and then three field length strips with no manure. And then on top of that, we do a checkerboard of nitrogen, side dress nitrogen, or potentially upfront nitrogen, but probably side dress nitrogen is where we would start. And then what we would try and find out is where was the the MERN. MERN means the most economical rate of nitrogen. So if in this checkerboard we have some zero nitrogen, some zero commercial nitrogen or side dress nitrogen, some 30 pounds, 60 pounds, 90 pounds, 120 pounds, depending on what the manure is providing, then it will give us an idea of with and without manure, what was our most economical rate of nitrogen. And I really think that that's going to help us fine tune how do we incorporate weather into it? How do we incorporate soil test, organic matter, all that kind of thing, but also the field history of the manures. Like if it's a solid manure, what is that credit that we're getting? And then with the side dress nitrogen test that Ben Rosser and the corn producers do every spring, what is the amount, like are we getting more nitrogen release based on weather and temperatures and soil moisture, or are we getting more? And so that is going to make a difference as well. Most of the time, it's most of the time, and then the other thing, and I think Brett, you came on a little bit later, but having pH and having carbon to nitrogen ratio in the manure analysis helps us to manage when that nitrogen is going to be available. If I have a carbon to nitrogen ratio from pig manure that is 5 to 1 or less, that nitrogen is going to be there for the corn crop. I don't need huge side dress amounts in addition. If, well, I might, depending on how much manure I put on, but with dairy manure, it's a little bit more difficult. But with the pig manure, yeah, I might have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 5 to 5, but the organic nitrogen in pig manure is pretty low. So if I've lost all the ammonium nitrogen because the pH is at 8 and I applied it when it was a high wind, warm, sunny day, I might have lost a lot of that ammonium nitrogen. So even though my organic nitrogen is quickly available, I might not have there what I thought I did. So knowing what the pH is, knowing what the carbon to nitrogen ratio is, helps me to manage it. It won't help me change the pH, but if I know that I want that nitrogen for the crop, I might incorporate that one a little bit more quickly, or I might inject that manure so that I don't lose it through volatilization and high pH. So
Do
it's
you guys
those kind of management strategies.
do you guys have like removals as far as oats, triticale,
Oh yeah,
alfalfa kind of thing in
yeah.
there?
So if we go back to, oh no, I didn't want to copy. We go back to this field and corn silage. Um,
Basically.
actually, let's just add, let's go to corn, let's go to field. Let's go to field two. And if I want to input a crop. So I have every kind of crop that you could possibly imagine.
Perfect.
I also have cover crops.
And is there a tons per acre you can add in there so you can kind of figure out what you're taking out?
Mhm. So
Okay.
cover, so
Should be good.
let's say cover crop oats. And let's say I'm going to feed that oats. And I've measured it and I've got 2.5 because I put manure to it and I've got a lot. I'm making numbers up, but still. Um, so, okay, what did I do wrong? Cover crop oats yield. Okay, why is it not showing anything? Oh, because
Doesn't need
it's,
to be harvested. Yeah.
see, even that happens to me. If you look over here, you're going, wait a minute, why isn't it showing up? So I harvested it, or I'm grazing it or whatever, then this is approximately what would be removed. Um, yeah. Now, if I went to just oats, um, this is where you really know what your alphabet is or how well you know your alphabet. And again, let's say my yield is oats. Let's say 100 bushels because I put manure on a regular basis. So then I've got my production recommendations and my removal. So I have that for basically almost every crop you could ever imagine. Most of them you'll never use. And then for,
sorry, Chris.
oh, it's fine.
I was gonna hop on quick to we are at 12, so we might start to lose people, but I wanted to quickly plug that we are going to be sending out a feedback survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill it out. If you do, you'll be in a draw for a Canadian Tire gift card for $25. So would appreciate it if you guys can take the time to fill out that survey quick. I see a few more questions popping up in the chat, so we'll go to those. But I think Chris, you're probably willing to stay on and answer a few more questions.
Oh yeah, for
Uh,
sure. Yeah,
okay.
and I haven't, we don't do, like most of the time when we do presentations, we use screenshots and that kind of thing. So this kind of workshop, I really appreciate being able to go through. I hope this is what people wanted, but the feedback would be really appreciated so that if we do something like this again, I know what people actually wanted.
So we'll hop to the questions in the chat. So it's one from Perry. Is OMAFA working on updating P and K soil test levels? I think with 20 ppm phos and 20 bushel corn, you are trying to cycle 100% of the P. Um, Chris, I don't know if you need help interpreting where Perry was going, or if you have comments.
Um, Trying to cycle all of the P. So the one thing that I think is important to realize with soil tests is the soil test is measuring the basically the soluble P or the P that's going to be available to a crop. There's a lot more phosphorus in the soil than what the soil test is going to make available. And so some of the other things, and this is one of my complaints with updating soil test levels, is it also is important to know what is your soil organic matter level. Because if you have a soil organic matter level of 5 or 4 even, then you're cycling more nutrients than if you have a soil organic matter level of 1.5. So the more active, the more microbial activity you've got in the soil, probably the better for having some of those nutrients available. Are they working on updating the phosphorus and soil test levels? Yes. I think one of the things that we try to do, and it's one of the reasons that I went through this exercise, is that if we look at soil fertility levels and we look at where we start and we do the whole crop rotation. So we're looking at where nutrients are coming in, where nutrients are going out in that full rotation, and we look at where are our soil fertility levels to start with, then we get an idea of how much are we changing. And if our soil fertility levels are low, then we start looking at, okay, am I trying just to meet based on, because agronomic production is based on sufficiency, wants to make sure there's enough there for economic response. Where if I do my build and maintain, I want the soil test to be high and then I don't have to do anything. The looking at this kind of approach with AgriSuite in the field management plan, it lets me do a little bit of both. It lets me say, okay, my soil fertility levels are low. Where can I do some building? I don't want to build so that I'm at extremely high levels because, first of all, right now that's going to be way too expensive. But I want some wiggle room. So if I can get like in this example, we started at 11, we built it by 4. So potentially we're getting to somewhere around 15 at the end of it. So over a period of a couple rotations, I would maybe be able to get close to that 20 parts per million. And that gives me some wiggle room. So the different strategies for soil test are sufficiency, build and maintain. And part of that is going to depend on is my field owned or is it rented? If I'm renting the field and I don't know if I'm going to have it next year, then probably I'm going to stick with a sufficiency approach and I want to make sure there's enough there for the crop, but I'm not going to spend a lot of money building it to 20 parts per million. If it's my own field, I've just bought it, it's got low soil fertility, then yeah, I'm going to look at what organic amendments can I put into the the rotation so that I'm building it a little bit. And I'm going to pick my products based on that. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, I'll hop to the next one. So, if you're growing shorter season crop varieties, is it recommended that we adjust the heat units, or should we leave these at the predetermined value?
I would just leave them at the predetermined value. You can for corn. Where the crop heat units comes into play is I forget what. Oh, I think for some of the background, the greenhouse gas calculator, phosphorus index. And it comes into play for corn recommendations, corn nitrogen recommendations.
Okay, another question from the chat. Will more fertilizer products be added within the fertilizer application portion? I know there are common blend values listed within the category, but not all blends are included. Is there a way to manually input NPK values of the fertilizer being applied?
Yes. I'm going to go back to share screen for a second. I didn't show this, but screen. If I wanted to add a fertilizer, if I know, and a lot of times you do this, so I can calculate the nutrients applied. I can calculate a blend based on the different products we have available, or I can just, if I wanted to, I can say I'm going to apply 200 pounds, oops, not 2,000, 200 pounds of nitrogen.
Are you able to share your screen, Chris?
Oh, oops. I guess it helps if you press share. So I'll go back. So I can go back to my add a fertilizer. And in the fertilizer, I have the option to calculate the nutrients applied. I have the option to calculate a blend based on the fertilizers that are available in the app. And we did just add some more. So if we know which ones are common, we will add them. And then we can add the nutrients applied. So if I wanted to just add 200 pounds of nitrogen, 60 pounds of phosphorus, 200 pounds, oops, 200 pounds of potash, I can do that. And it's basically just going to show up here. If I'm doing, and that's good if I'm doing just a fast track and I'm putting it all on at one point, or like so depending on what you're trying to do in the program. But I can calculate a fertilizer blend and it's the same thing. I can add the nutrients that I want, then I add the products. The important thing though is I gotta add the product first that has the lowest number. So if I started with ammonium and it's already got let's say 200 pounds, it's going to have 24 pounds of nitrogen. That's going to reduce the amount of phosphorus because, or it's going to give me zero phosphorus because I've already added most of the nitrogen. So you have to start with the map. Oh, so it's already done it for me automatically. It's kind of cool. I don't use this very often. And if I wanted to, I could add sulfur. I could add zinc, and it would also allow me to add those products. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there are
Oh,
more.
they said thank you. So
Okay.
a couple of thank yous coming in the chat. I think this will be the very last call for questions. If you wanted to type it quickly into the chat or unmute yourself and yell it out. Okay, seeing nothing and hearing nothing. Well, thank everyone again for signing on. I think this is a really nice session. Nice to be interactive and just a very hands-on. How do we use AgriSuite? So I thank Christine Brown for making herself available to do this. And Chris, any last words from you before we let everyone off?
Well, I'll just say if people are going through and they're doing their own farm scenario, which that would be music to my ears. If you come up with questions, don't hesitate to send me a text or send me an email. Those kind of questions are welcome anytime.
Thank you for saying that, Chris, because that is something in our survey. Uh, Christine has made herself available. If you're interested in a bit of a follow-up session, we might try to create some maybe smaller kitchen table meetings or something so we can really dive in to your particular operation a little closer. So
Yeah,
please fill out the
ideally
survey.
where you've done the plan for your farm and then we can just discuss the strategies.
Yeah,
That would be pretty cool.
awesome. Thanks again, everyone, and thank you, Christine, and let you all go. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.